Malcolm Johnson lived in a part of town where life was not easy. The streets were lined with cracked sidewalks and the buildings looked tired, their paint peeling under the weight of years gone by. Malcolm's family didn't have much. His mom worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Despite the challenges, Malcolm tried his best to stay positive. He was 16 years old, tall for his age, with dark skin that seemed to glow when he smiled. But lately there hadn't been many reasons to smile. On this particular November afternoon, the air carried a chill that bit through Malcolm's thin jacket. He walked home from school, his backpack heavy with books and assignments he would probably struggle to finish because the heating at home never worked right. His stomach growled softly, reminding him of the peanut butter sandwich his mom had packed for lunch. It wasn't much, but it was all they could afford some days. Still, Malcolm felt lucky. He knew other kids who went without even that. As he passed the park near his apartment building, something caught his eye. Underneath one of the benches sat a man wrapped in a dirty gray blanket. His face was hidden behind a scruffy beard, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. An empty coffee cup rested beside him, waiting for coins or kindness from strangers. Malcolm slowed down as he approached, unsure what to do. He'd seen homeless people before. They weren't uncommon in his neighborhood. But there was something about this man that made Malcolm pause. The man lifted his head slightly, sensing someone nearby. His eyes were tired, but they held a spark of hope, as if he expected rejection, but hoped for something better. Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought about the sandwich tucked away in his bag. It was his only meal for the day, and he was already hungry. Yet, looking at the man sitting alone on the cold bench, Malcolm couldn't ignore the pang of guilt twisting inside him. "Hey," Malcolm said quietly, stepping closer. The man blinked, surprised to hear a voice addressing him. "Are you okay?" The man gave a weak smile. "I'm alive," he replied, his voice raspy. "That's more than I can say for some days." Malcolm hesitated. He wanted to help, but he wasn't sure how. Finally, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the sandwich. "Here," he said, holding it out awkwardly. "It's not much, but I thought maybe you could use it." For a moment, the man simply stared at the offering. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." Malcolm shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "It's just a sandwich." But the man shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You've got a good heart, kid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Malcolm didn't know what to say to that. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to see if anyone else was watching. When he looked back at the man, he noticed how carefully he held the sandwich, almost like it was precious. For the first time, Malcolm realized how little he truly had compared to others. Sure, his family struggled, but at least they had a home. At least they had each other. "What's your name?" the man asked after a while. "Malcolm," he replied. "What's yours?" "Earl," the man said. "Earl Thompson." "Well, nice to meet you, Earl," Malcolm mumbled. He didn't know why he felt so awkward. Maybe it was because he wasn't used to talking to adults like this. Or maybe it was because he knew deep down that he couldn't fix Earl's problems. Not really. All he could do was share what little he had. Earl unwrapped the sandwich and took a small bite, savoring it as though it were the finest meal he'd ever tasted. Watching him, Malcolm felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness because no one should have to live like this, and satisfaction because he'd done something, anything, to make someone else's day a little brighter. "You go to school around here?" Earl asked between bites. "Yeah," Malcolm nodded. "Just a few blocks away." Earl tilted his head, studying Malcolm curiously. "You seem like a smart kid. What do you want to be when you grow up?" Malcolm laughed nervously. "I don't know. Probably nothing big. My mom says I should focus on getting through high school first." "That's fair," Earl said with a nod. "But don't sell yourself short. You've got potential, Malcolm, I can see it." Malcolm wasn't sure what to make of that comment. No one had ever told him he had potential before. Most people just saw him as another kid from the wrong side of town, destined to follow the same path as everyone else. But Earl's words stuck with him, lingering in his mind long after he said goodbye and continued walking home. When Malcolm finally reached his apartment, he felt lighter somehow. Even though he hadn't eaten since breakfast, he didn't feel quite as hungry anymore. Instead, he felt proud. Proud that he'd done something kind, even if it was small. Proud that he'd listened to the quiet voice inside him telling him to stop and help. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Malcolm thought about Earl. Who was he? How had he ended up living on the streets? And most importantly, what could Malcolm do to help? These questions swirled in his mind, keeping him awake long after the rest of the apartment had fallen silent. Little did Malcolm know, this chance encounter was just the beginning of something far greater than he could have imagined. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can set off a chain reaction, changing lives in ways no one expects. And for Malcolm Johnson, giving a simple sandwich to a stranger would soon lead to opportunities and friendships he never dreamed possible. The next day, Malcolm couldn't stop thinking about Earl. As he walked to school, his mind kept replaying their brief conversation from the day before. He wondered if Earl had found somewhere warm to sleep or if he was still sitting on that cold bench in the park. Malcolm felt a strange pull toward the man, like an invisible thread connecting them. By the time lunch rolled around, he knew he couldn't just ignore it. After grabbing his own sandwich from his bag, a plain cheese, one this time, he headed back to the park. When Malcolm arrived, he saw Earl right where he'd left him. The older man was huddled under the same thin blanket, staring off into the distance. At first, Malcolm hesitated, unsure if Earl would even remember him. But then Earl turned his head and spotted Malcolm approaching. A faint smile spread across his face. "You came back," Earl said, his voice tinged with surprise. "Yeah," Malcolm replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I thought you might be hungry again." Earl chuckled softly. "Always am, kid. But I wasn't expecting company." Malcolm handed over the sandwich and Earl accepted it gratefully. This time, though, Malcolm didn't leave right away. Instead, he sat down cautiously on the edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. For a while, neither of them spoke. Malcolm watched as Earl ate slowly, savoring each bite. Finally, Earl broke the silence. "So, tell me about yourself, Malcolm," he said. "What's your story?" Malcolm shrugged. "Not much to tell. I live around here with my mom. She works hard, but we don't have a lot. I go to school, try to stay out of trouble. That's pretty much it." Earl nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've got responsibilities for someone your age. That's admirable." Malcolm frowned. No one had ever called him admirable before. Most people barely noticed him at all. "It's not really a big deal," he muttered. "I mean, everyone has problems, right?" "True enough," Earl agreed. "But not everyone handles them the way you do. You're thoughtful, kind. Those are rare qualities these days." Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. Compliments made him uneasy, especially when they came from someone who seemed so wise. He changed the subject quickly. "What about you? How did you end up, well, out here?" Earl sighed deeply, his gaze drifting toward the ground. For a moment, Malcolm worried he'd crossed a line. But then Earl began to speak, his voice low and steady. "I used to teach high school English," he said. "Back when I had a house, a car, a family. My wife passed away suddenly about 5 years ago. After that, things fell apart. I couldn't keep up with the bills and my pride wouldn't let me ask for help. Eventually, I lost everything." Malcolm listened intently, his heart aching for the man beside him. He couldn't imagine losing someone so important and having to start over alone. "That must have been really hard," he said quietly. "It was," Earl admitted. "But life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. Sometimes you just have to take what comes your way and make the best of it." As they talked, Malcolm realized there was more to Earl than met the eye. Beneath the scruffy beard and worn clothes was a man full of knowledge and experience. Earl told stories about his teaching days, how he loved helping students find their voices through writing. He spoke fondly of his late wife, describing her laugh and the way she always knew how to cheer him up. and he shared bits of wisdom he'd picked up over the years, lessons that stuck with Malcolm long after their conversation ended. At one point, Earl reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, battered notebook. Its cover was faded, and the edges were frayed from use. "This is my lifeline," Earl explained, holding it up. "Whenever things get tough, I write. It helps me process everything." Curious, Malcolm leaned closer. "What do you write about?" "All sorts of things," Earl replied. "Memories, thoughts, little observations. Sometimes I jot down quotes or poems. It's nothing fancy, but it keeps me grounded." "Can I see?" Malcolm asked before he could stop himself. Earl hesitated for a moment, then handed the notebook over. Malcolm flipped through the pages carefully, marveling at the words scrawled across them. Some entries were short and simple, like lists of things Earl was grateful for. Others were longer, filled with vivid descriptions and heartfelt reflections. One passage caught Malcolm's attention, a story about a young boy who dreamed of becoming an astronaut despite growing up in poverty. The imagery was so powerful that Malcolm could almost picture the boy staring up at the stars, his eyes full of hope. "This is amazing," Malcolm said, looking up at Earl. "You're really good at this." Earl laughed softly. "Thanks, kid. Writing's just a hobby for me now. Nobody reads it except me." "Well, I think it's great," Malcolm insisted. "You should share it with more people." Earl shook his head. "Nah, it's just for me. Besides, who'd want to read something written by a homeless guy?" Malcolm frowned. "That's not fair. Your words matter, no matter where you are." Earl studied Malcolm for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled faintly. You remind me of some of my old students, full of fire and determination. They believed they could change the world too." Malcolm looked away, feeling a mix of pride and doubt. Change the world? He wasn't sure he believed that was possible. But talking to Earl made him feel different, like maybe he could do more than just survive. Maybe he could actually make a difference. Before leaving the park that afternoon, Malcolm promised to visit Earl again soon. As he walked home, his mind buzzed with ideas. What if he started writing like Earl? Not because he thought he'd be any good at it, but because it sounded like a way to sort through his own thoughts. Life had thrown a lot at him over the years, and sometimes it felt like he didn't know how to handle it all. Maybe putting pen to paper would help. When Malcolm got home, he rummaged through his room until he found an old spiral-bound notebook buried at the bottom of a drawer. It wasn't much. Its pages were slightly yellowed and the cover was plain white, but it would do. Sitting at his desk, Malcolm stared at the blank page in front of him. He didn't know where to start. Should he write about his mom, about school, about Earl? Finally, he wrote a single sentence. "Today I gave a sandwich to a homeless man named Earl." It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. For the first time in a long time, Malcolm felt a spark of excitement. He didn't know where this new interest in writing would lead, but he wanted to find out. Little did he realize this decision would set him on a path he never expected, one that would bring challenges, opportunities, and friendships capable of changing his life forever. Over the next few weeks, Malcolm made it a habit to visit Earl almost every day. Sometimes he brought extra food from home, a piece of fruit, a granola bar, or leftovers from dinner if there were any. Other times, he just came to sit and talk. Their conversations became something Malcolm looked forward to, a bright spot in his otherwise stressful days. Earl had a way of making him feel important, like his thoughts and opinions mattered. It was a feeling Malcolm wasn't used to, but one he quickly grew to appreciate. One chilly afternoon, as they sat together on the park bench, Earl pulled out his worn notebook again. "You know," he said, flipping through the pages, "you've got a knack for listening. I bet you'd be a good writer." Malcolm shook his head immediately. "I don't think so. I mean, I've been trying to write stuff down, but it's not anything special." "Let me see," Earl insisted, holding out his hand. Malcolm hesitated. He hadn't shown anyone what he'd written, not even his mom. Most of it felt awkward and messy, like he couldn't quite get his thoughts straight, on paper. But something about Earl's encouraging smile gave him courage. Reluctantly, He pulled his spiral-bound notebook from his backpack and handed it over. Earl took it gently, his eyes scanning the pages with care. Malcolm watched nervously, waiting for the older man's reaction. After a few minutes, Earl looked up and smiled. "This is good, Malcolm. Really good." "Are you sure?" Malcolm asked skeptically. "It's kind of all over the place." "That's okay," Earl replied. "Writing doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. And yours is. You've got a voice, kid. Trust me, that's rare." Malcolm didn't know what to say. No one had ever called his writing good before. In school, his essays usually earned average grades at best. His teachers often told him to work harder on grammar and structure, which only made him doubt himself more. But Earl's words carried weight. They felt genuine, like he truly believed what he was saying. Encouraged by Earl's praise, Malcolm decided to keep going. Each night, after finishing his homework, he'd spend an hour or two scribbling in his notebook. At first, he wrote about simple things, his daily routine, memories of playing basketball with friends, moments when life felt especially tough. Gradually, though, he started tackling bigger topics, the struggles of growing up poor, the frustration of seeing people judged based on where they came from, the hope he still held on to despite everything. One evening, as Malcolm worked on a new entry, Earl interrupted his train of thought. "Have you ever thought about entering a contest?" he asked casually. "A contest?" Malcolm echoed, confused. "What do you mean?" "There's a community center downtown," Earl explained. "They hold an essay competition every year for local students. The winner gets a cash prize and a chance to read their work aloud at the awards ceremony. I think you should enter." Malcolm laughed nervously. "Me? No way. I'm not good enough for that." "You won't know unless you try," Earl countered. "Besides, your words deserve to be heard. Don't sell yourself short, Malcolm." For days afterward, Malcolm wrestled with the idea. Part of him wanted to believe Earl that maybe his writing could stand out, but another part was terrified of failure. What if no one liked it? What if he embarrassed himself? Still, the thought of giving up without trying nagged at him. Finally, he decided to go for it. If nothing else, it would be a learning experience. With Earl's guidance, Malcolm revised one of his essays, polishing it until it felt ready. Titled "Lessons from a Forgotten Man," the piece told the story of how meeting Earl had changed his perspective on life. It described their conversations, the kindness Earl showed despite his circumstances, and the unexpected lessons Malcolm had learned about resilience, empathy, and finding beauty in small moments. When he finished typing it up, Malcolm felt a mix of pride and anxiety. This was the most personal thing he'd ever written, and sharing it felt like exposing a piece of his soul. The deadline for submissions arrived sooner than Malcolm expected. On the morning he planned to send his essay, he stopped by the park to tell Earl. "I did it," he announced, grinning. "I sent it in." Earl clapped him on the shoulder. "That's my boy. I knew you had it in you." Now came the hard part, waiting. Weeks passed, and Malcolm tried to put the contest out of his mind. He focused on school, helped his mom around the house, and continued visiting Earl whenever he could. Life went on as usual, or so he thought. One Saturday afternoon, while Malcolm was helping his mom clean the kitchen, the phone rang. His mom answered it, her face lighting up with surprise. "It's for you," she said, handing him the receiver. Malcolm froze, unsure who would be calling him. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Is this Malcolm Johnson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Mrs. Harper. I'm your English teacher. Congratulations. You've placed second in the essay competition." Malcolm's heart skipped a beat. "Second place? Are you serious?" "Absolutely," Mrs. Harper replied warmly. "Your essay was powerful, Malcolm. The judges were very impressed. There's an award ceremony next Friday night, and we'd love for you to attend." After hanging up, Malcolm stood in stunned silence. Second place? He hadn't dared to dream that far. When he finally managed to tell his mom and Earl the news, Both reacted with overwhelming excitement. His mom hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she whispered. Earl beamed with pride. "See? I told you. You've got talent, Malcolm. Now the whole world will see it." As the days leading up to the ceremony ticked by, Malcolm practiced reading his essay aloud, nervous about speaking in front of a crowd. Earl coached him, offering tips on how to project his voice and maintain eye contact. "Just remember," Earl advised, "you're not talking to strangers, you're sharing your truth. Let that guide you." On the night of the event, Malcolm dressed in his best clothes, a slightly wrinkled button-down shirt and slacks borrowed from a neighbor, and headed to the community center with his mom. The room was packed with people, including other students, parents, and teachers. Malcolm spotted Earl sitting near the back wearing a suit jacket someone had donated. Seeing him there gave Malcolm a surge of confidence. When his name was called, Malcolm stepped up to the podium, his hands trembling. He scanned the audience, locking eyes with Earl for a brief moment before beginning to read. As he spoke, his nerves faded, replaced by a sense of purpose. The words flowed naturally, carrying the weight of everything he'd experienced over the past months. By the time he finished, the room erupted into applause. Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. For the first time, he truly understood the power of storytelling. Afterward, as people congratulated him, a woman approached Malcolm with a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Lisa," she introduced herself. "I'm a social worker. Your essay moved me deeply, especially the part about Earl. Is he here tonight?" Malcolm nodded, pointing toward the back of the room. Lisa thanked him and walked over to speak with Earl. Watching them talk, Malcolm felt a wave of gratitude. Not only had his act of kindness toward Earl sparked a friendship that changed his own life, but it might also help change Earl's. For the first time in a long while, Malcolm allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really could make a difference. The days following the essay competition were a whirlwind for Malcolm. Second place in the contest had earned him not only a modest cash prize, but also recognition he never imagined possible. His English teacher, Mrs. Harper, couldn't stop praising him, and even students at school who usually ignored him started nodding hello in the hallways. For the first time in his life, Malcolm felt like people saw him as more than just the quiet kid from the poor neighborhood. But the real change began when Lisa, the social worker who approached Earl at the awards ceremony, followed through on her promise to help. She visited Earl regularly over the next few weeks, working tirelessly to get him back on his feet. With her guidance, Earl was able to secure transitional housing, a small apartment in a clean, safe building, and access resources like job training programs and counseling services. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but slowly, Earl started to rebuild his life. Malcolm stayed close to Earl throughout this process, visiting him whenever he could. Their conversations shifted slightly now that Earl was no longer living on the streets. Instead of talking about survival, they began discussing dreams and possibilities. One evening, as they sat together in Earl's tiny apartment, Earl leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Malcolm," he said, "you've done something incredible here. Not just for me, but for yourself, too. Writing that essay, it took guts, and look where it's gotten you." Malcolm shrugged, still unsure how to process everything that had happened. "I don't know. I guess I got lucky." "No such thing as luck," Earl replied firmly. "You worked hard and you cared enough to share your truth. That's what made the difference." Earl's words stuck with Malcolm, planting seeds of confidence he hadn't felt before. Encouraged by his success in the essay contest, Malcolm decided to keep writing. He started working on new pieces, short stories inspired by his experiences, reflections on growing up in a tough neighborhood, and even fictional tales about characters overcoming challenges. Each story gave him a chance to explore emotions and ideas he'd kept bottled up for years. One afternoon, while flipping through one of Earl's notebooks, Malcolm noticed something written on the inside cover. "Words have power. Use them wisely." The phrase resonated deeply with him. He realized that every word he wrote carried meaning, not just for himself, but for others who might read it. Maybe his stories could inspire someone else the way Earl's wisdom had inspired him. Meanwhile, Earl continued making progress in his own life. He found part-time work at a local library, shelving books and helping patrons. It wasn't glamorous, but it brought him joy. "Feels good to be useful again," he told Malcolm during one of their visits. "And you know what? I've been thinking about teaching again. Maybe volunteering at a community center or mentoring kids. What do you think?" "I think that's awesome," Malcolm replied honestly. "You'd be great at it." Earl smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Thanks, kid. You're partly responsible for this, you know. If you hadn't believed in me, I might still be sitting on that park bench." Malcolm shook his head. "No, you did all the hard work. I just gave you a sandwich." Earl chuckled. "Sometimes, a sandwich is all it takes to remind someone they're worth something. Don't underestimate the power of kindness, Malcolm." As the months passed, Malcolm's confidence grew. His mom noticed the change in him, how he walked taller, spoke more confidently, and seemed genuinely excited about the future. Even his grades improved, thanks in part to Mrs. Harper, who encouraged him to apply for a scholarship program aimed at supporting underprivileged students pursuing higher education. At first, Malcolm hesitated. Scholarships were competitive, and he doubted he stood a chance. But with Earl's encouragement, he decided to give it a shot. Filling out the application felt daunting. There were essays to write, recommendations to gather, and forms to complete. Malcolm spent countless nights hunched over his desk, pouring his heart into each section. When asked why he wanted to pursue college, he wrote about his dream of becoming a writer, one who could shine a light on the struggles and triumphs of people like him. He talked about Earl and how their friendship taught him the value of empathy and resilience. By the time he submitted the application, Malcolm felt drained but hopeful. Then came the waiting game. Days turned into weeks, and Malcolm tried to stay patient. He threw himself into his studies and spent time helping his mom around the house. Occasionally, he'd visit Earl, who always reminded him to stay positive. "If you put your best foot forward," Earl would say, "good things will come." Finally, one crisp spring morning, the letter arrived. Malcolm's hands trembled as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing the words he'd been longing to read. "Congratulations. You have been awarded the Rising Stars Scholarship." Malcolm stared at the page, unable to believe his eyes. He ran to show his mom, who screamed with joy and hugged him tightly. "We did it," she exclaimed. "You did it, baby." That evening, Malcolm rushed to Earl's apartment to share the news. Earl greeted him with a wide grin. "Let me guess, you got it, didn't you?" "How did you know?" Malcolm asked, laughing. "Because I know you," Earl replied simply. "You've got grit, Malcolm. Always have." Overwhelmed with gratitude, Malcolm hugged Earl tightly. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said. "None of this would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the park." Earl patted him on the back. "Don't sell yourself short, kid. You made this happen. All I did was remind you of what you already knew. You're capable of amazing things." With the scholarship secured, Malcolm began preparing for college. It was a bittersweet time. On one hand, he was thrilled about the opportunities ahead. On the other, he knew leaving for school meant saying goodbye to the familiar comforts of home, and to Earl, who had become like family. Still, Earl reassured him constantly. "You're going places, Malcolm," he said during one of their final visits before Malcolm left. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" Malcolm asked. "Keep writing," Earl said earnestly. "Share your voice with the world. People need to hear it." Malcolm nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I promise." On the day Malcolm packed his bags and boarded the bus to college, Earl was there to see him off. As the bus pulled away, Malcolm looked out the window and waved until Earl's figure disappeared from view. Though he felt a pang of sadness, he also felt hope. For the first time in his life, he truly believed he could create a better future, for himself, for his mom, and maybe even for others like Earl. College proved challenging, but rewarding. Malcolm threw himself into his studies, determined to make the most of the opportunity. He joined a campus writing group where he shared his stories and received constructive feedback. Slowly, he began submitting pieces to literary magazines and online platforms. To his amazement, some of them got published. Each acceptance fueled his determination to keep going. During winter break, Malcolm returned home to visit his mom and Earl. Seeing how far both of them had come filled him with pride. His mom had picked up extra shifts at work and saved enough to fix the heater in their apartment. Earl, meanwhile, had settled comfortably into his role at the library and was mentoring a group of teenagers interested in creative writing. Watching Earl guide the young writers reminded Malcolm of their own bond and how much it had shaped him. By the time Malcolm graduated from college, he had built a portfolio of published work and gained admission to a prestigious graduate program in creative writing. His debut novel, loosely based on his friendship with Earl, became a bestseller, earning praise for its honesty and depth. Readers connected with the story of a struggling teen whose act of kindness sparked a chain reaction of hope and healing. Through it all, Malcolm never forgot the lessons he learned from Earl or the power of a single act of compassion. As he stood on stage accepting awards and giving interviews, he often thought back to that cold November afternoon in the park. A simple sandwich had changed two lives forever, proving that even the smallest gestures could ripple outward, touching hearts and transforming futures in ways no one could predict. Years had passed since Malcolm first met Earl in the park, but the memory of that day stayed with him like a guiding light. Life had taken Malcolm far from the cold benches and worn sidewalks of his old neighborhood. Now, he lived in a cozy apartment, in the city, surrounded by books, notes, and drafts of stories he was working on. His journey, from a struggling teenager to a successful author, felt surreal at times, as if it belonged to someone else. Yet every time he sat down to write, he remembered where it all began, with kindness, courage, and a man named Earl. Malcolm's debut novel, inspired by his friendship with Earl, had become a national bestseller. Readers across the country connected with its themes of resilience, empathy, and the transformative power of human connection. The book earned him invitations to speak at schools, community centers, and conferences. At each event, Malcolm shared his story, not just the parts about success, but also the struggles that shaped him. He wanted people to know that no matter how hard life got, there was always hope. And sometimes hope came wrapped in something as simple as a peanut butter sandwich. One crisp autumn morning, Malcolm received an email from Lisa, the social worker who had helped Earl years ago. She invited him to attend a local fundraiser aimed at supporting homeless individuals and families in the area. Earl will be there, she wrote. He's agreed to share his story too. The news filled Malcolm with excitement. It had been months since he'd seen Earl and he missed their conversations. They still called or texted occasionally, but life had pulled them in different directions. Malcolm immediately RSVP'd for the event and marked the date on his calendar. On the evening of the fundraiser, Malcolm arrived early, dressed in a neat suit and tie. The venue, a large auditorium decorated with twinkling lights and banners, buzzed with energy. People milled about, chatting and enjoying hors d'oeuvres. Malcolm scanned the room until he spotted Earl sitting near the stage wearing a sharp blazer and looking healthier than ever. When Earl saw Malcolm, his face lit up, and he waved enthusiastically. "Look at you," Earl exclaimed as Malcolm approached. "All grown up and fancy." Malcolm laughed, shaking his head. "You're one to talk. That blazer fits you perfectly." Earl grinned, adjusting the lapels. "Turns out I clean up pretty well." They spent the next few minutes catching up, talking about everything from Malcolm's writing career to Earl's work mentoring young writers at the library. Eventually, Lisa stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone to the event. After a brief introduction, she invited Earl to speak. Earl stood nervously, gripping the microphone with both hands. "I'm not much of a public speaker," he admitted, drawing laughter from the audience. "But I do have a story to tell, one that changed my life forever." He went on to describe his lowest moments, losing his wife, falling into homelessness, and feeling invisible to the world. Then he spoke about meeting Malcolm, the boy who offered him a sandwich and, more importantly, a sense of dignity. That moment reminded me that I mattered, Earl said, his voice thick with emotion. And because of Malcolm's kindness, I found the strength to rebuild my life. When Earl finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Malcolm watched from the sidelines, tears welling up in his eyes. As Earl returned to his seat, he gave Malcolm a knowing smile. "Your turn," he whispered. Malcolm took a deep breath and walked to the stage. Standing under the bright lights, he felt a mix of nerves and gratitude. He began by thanking Lisa and the organizers for putting together the event, then turned his attention to the audience. "A long time ago," he started, "I learned something important. Kindness has a ripple effect. When you help someone, even in a small way, you never know how far that act will go. For me, giving a sandwich to a stranger led to a friendship that changed my life. And his." Malcolm went on to share details of his journey, from growing up in poverty to discovering the joy of writing. He talked about the challenges he faced along the way and the people who supported him, especially Earl. "I wouldn't be standing here today without him," Malcolm said, gesturing toward Earl. "He taught me that everyone has value, no matter their circumstances, and he showed me the importance of believing in yourself, even when things seem impossible." By the time Malcolm finished speaking, the audience was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Backstage afterward, several people approached him to express their admiration. One woman in particular caught his attention. She introduced herself as a teacher and told Malcolm how much his story resonated with her students. "They need to hear messages like yours," she said. "It gives them hope." As the night wound down, Malcolm found himself reflecting on how far he and Earl had come. Their lives had intertwined in ways neither of them could have predicted, and their bond remained unshakable. Before leaving the venue, Earl handed Malcolm a small leather-bound journal. "For your next chapter," he said with a wink. Malcolm accepted the gift, running his fingers over the smooth cover. "Thank you," he said softly. "This means a lot." Weeks later, Malcolm decided to visit his hometown. Though he rarely returned these days, he felt drawn to the familiar streets and faces. As he walked through the park where he'd first met Earl, memories flooded back. The bench they used to sit on was still there, weathered but sturdy. Malcolm paused for a moment, imagining the scrawny teenager he once was, clutching a sandwich and wondering if he was making a difference. Nearby, he noticed a young boy handing a granola bar to a homeless woman huddled on the ground. The sight stopped Malcolm in his tracks. He watched as the boy smiled shyly before turning to leave. Something inside Malcolm stirred. "Hey," Malcolm called out, jogging over to the boy. "That was really nice of you." The boy looked up, startled. "Oh, thanks?" Malcolm knelt down so they were eye level. "Do you mind if I ask why you did that?" The boy shrugged. "She looked hungry, I guess. My mom says we should always try to help people if we can." "Well, your mom sounds like a smart lady," Malcolm said, smiling. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here, keep doing what you're doing. It matters more than you think." The boy stared at the money wide-eyed. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Malcolm replied. "Consider it an investment in kindness." As he walked away, Malcolm felt a warmth spread through his chest. Paying it forward wasn't just about repaying Earl for his guidance. It was about continuing the cycle of compassion that had brought him this far. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the potential to spark change. And Malcolm knew better than anyone how powerful those sparks could be. Later that evening, as he sat in his childhood bedroom flipping through Earl's gift, the leather-bound journal, Malcolm began jotting down ideas for his next project. This time, he wanted to write a collection of short stories inspired by real-life acts of kindness. Each tale would highlight the impact of generosity, reminding readers that even the simplest gestures could transform lives. Writing had always been Malcolm's way of making sense of the world, but now it served another purpose: inspiring others to see the good around them. With every word he penned, he honored the lessons he'd learned from Earl and the countless strangers who had shown him kindness along the way. As he closed the journal for the night, Malcolm glanced out the window, at the quiet street below. Somewhere out there, another story was unfolding. A new encounter, a fresh beginning, a chance for someone to change a life with a single act of compassion. And though he couldn't predict what the future held, Malcolm knew one thing for certain. The ripple effect of kindness would continue, spreading farther than anyone could imagine. Years passed, and Malcolm's career as an author flourished. His books sold thousands of copies, and his name became synonymous with stories of hope and resilience. People from all walks of life reached out to him, teachers using his novels. In their classrooms, readers sharing how his words had inspired them, and even strangers thanking him for reminding them that kindness mattered. Yet, despite the fame and success, Malcolm remained grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the people who helped shape him into the person he was today. One summer afternoon, Malcolm returned to his hometown for a book signing event at the local library. The organizers had set up a small stage in the main hall, surrounded by rows of chairs filled with eager attendees. Many faces were familiar: old neighbors, former classmates, and teachers who remembered him as a quiet boy with big dreams. But one face stood out above the rest: Earl, sitting near the front with a proud smile on his face. After the event, Malcolm made a beeline for Earl. "You didn't have to come," Malcolm said, pulling up a chair beside him. "But I'm glad you did." "Are you kidding?" Earl chuckled. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. Besides, I wanted to see my favorite author in action." Malcolm rolled his eyes playfully but couldn't hide his grin. "You know, none of this would have happened without you. You're the reason I started writing in the first place." Earl waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. You're the one who put in the work. I just gave you a little nudge." "A nudge that changed everything," Malcolm countered. "Seriously, Earl. You believed in me when no one else did, not even myself. That meant more than you'll ever know." Earl's expression softened. "Well, I suppose we both nudged each other, huh? You gave me hope when I needed it most, too." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, reflecting on how far they'd come. Then Earl leaned forward, his tone turning serious. "So, what's next for you, Malcolm? Any big plans?" Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, yes. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, a way to give back to communities like ours. Something focused on supporting underprivileged kids and helping them pursue their passions, whether it's writing, art, sports, or anything else. I want to create opportunities for others the way people created them for me." Earl raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That sounds incredible. Do you think you can pull it off?" "I don't know yet," Malcolm admitted, "but I'm going to try. And if I need advice, I know exactly who to call." Earl laughed, patting Malcolm on the shoulder. "Any time, kid. You know I've always got your back." Over the next several months, Malcolm poured his energy into launching the foundation. He named it the Ripple Effect, inspired by the idea that even the smallest acts of kindness could create waves of change. With the help of donors, volunteers, and friends, including Earl, who eagerly joined the advisory board, the foundation quickly gained momentum. They organized workshops, provided scholarships, and partnered with schools to offer mentorship programs. For the first time in years, Malcolm felt like he was truly making a difference, not just through his words but through action. One Saturday morning, Malcolm visited a community center where the Ripple Effect was hosting a creative writing workshop for teenagers. As he walked into the room, he saw a group of kids huddled around tables scribbling furiously in notebooks. Their enthusiasm reminded him of himself at that age, full of curiosity and untapped potential. He approached a young girl sitting alone in the corner. She looked up shyly as he knelt beside her. "Hi there," Malcolm said gently. "What are you working on?" "It's a story," she replied hesitantly, "about a girl who saves her neighborhood." "That sounds amazing," Malcolm encouraged. "Keep going. Stories like yours are important. They show people what's possible." The girl smiled faintly, her confidence boosted by his encouragement. Watching her return to her notebook, Malcolm felt a surge of pride. These kids were the future, and he was honored to play a small part in shaping it. Later that evening, as Malcolm drove home, he reflected on the day's events. Helping others brought him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced before. It wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about knowing that somewhere someone might feel seen and valued because of what he'd done. Just like Earl had made him feel all those years ago. As the years went by, Malcolm continued to balance his writing career with his work at The Ripple Effect. His second novel, inspired by the Foundation's mission, became another bestseller, further amplifying its message. Schools across the country began incorporating his books into their curriculums, sparking discussions about empathy, perseverance, and the power of community. One day, while attending a conference in a neighboring state, Malcolm received an unexpected phone call. It was Lisa, the social worker who had once helped Earl. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke. "Malcolm, I hate to tell you this over the phone, but Earl passed away last night." The news hit Malcolm like a punch to the gut. He sat down heavily, struggling to process what she'd said. Earl, his mentor, his friend, the man who had changed his life, was gone. Tears streamed down his face as memories flooded back. Their conversations in the park, the worn notebook Earl carried everywhere, the unwavering belief he'd shown in Malcolm when no one else had. Lisa continued softly, "He left something for you, Malcolm. A letter. He asked me to make sure you got it." After hanging up, Malcolm spent hours staring at the wall, overwhelmed by grief. Earl had been more than just a friend. He was family. Losing him felt unbearable. But deep down, Malcolm knew Earl wouldn't want him to dwell on sadness. Instead, he'd want Malcolm to focus on the good they'd accomplished together, and the work that still lay ahead. A week later, Lisa delivered the letter to Malcolm's apartment. Sitting at his desk, Malcolm carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Earl's handwriting was shaky but legible, each word carrying the weight of his final thoughts. "Dear Malcolm, if you're reading this, it means I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't be sad. I lived a full life thanks to you. You gave me purpose when I thought I had none, and you showed me that kindness isn't just about giving food or shelter. It's about seeing someone for who they truly are and believing in their potential. I know you'll keep doing great things, keep writing, keep inspiring, and most importantly, keep paying it forward. The world needs more people like you. Remember, the ripple effect doesn't end with us. It keeps going, touching lives we may never meet. So take care of yourself, Malcolm, and keep shining your light. With love." Earl tears blurred Malcolm's vision as he read the letter again and again. Earl's words were a reminder of why he'd started this journey in the first place. To spread kindness, to uplift others, and to prove that everyone deserved a chance to thrive. Clutching the letter to his chest, Malcolm made a silent promise to honor Earl's legacy in everything he did. Years later, Malcolm stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people, accepting an award for his contributions to literature and philanthropy. As he glanced out at the crowd, he spotted familiar faces. His mom smiling proudly, Lisa nodding encouragingly, and even some of the kids from The Ripple Effect cheering loudly. Though Earl wasn't physically present, Malcolm felt his presence, strongly like a guiding hand resting on his shoulder. In his acceptance speech, Malcolm shared a simple message. Kindness is powerful. It changes lives, not just the lives of those we help, but our own as well. If you see someone struggling, don't look away. Offer a sandwich, a kind word, or a listening ear. You never know how far that act will go. As the audience erupted into applause, Malcolm stepped off the stage, feeling a profound sense of peace. Earl's lessons had stayed with him through every challenge and triumph. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new obstacles, Malcolm knew he'd face them with courage, compassion, and the belief that even the smallest gestures could spark extraordinary change. Because in the end, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about connection, about lifting each other up, about proving time and time again that kindness mattered. And Malcolm Johnson, once a poor black teen with nothing but a sandwich and a dream, had spent his life showing the world exactly that,